I have to confess, I'm not very good at using microphones, so I'm either going to be too far away or too close. So I'm going to try and keep it somewhere in the middle, and Josh will probably shout at me if it's in the wrong place. But yes. Right, so they've given me the after-lunch slot, and people have said, oh, well, you don't want the after-lunch slot, you know, it's everyone's going to be semi-conscious. Well, the good thing for you is my watch is genuinely, honestly broken. I couldn't put the clocks back, but I couldn't put my watch back. So, in fact, according to this, I finished now, so I'll see you later. So I shouldn't be too long. As you'll notice, behind me, there's nothing. And that's because, as you'll find out in a minute, I'm a ridiculously busy person. And that's not to disrespect any of you, and there are people who have spoken before me and people who are going to speak after me who have put a lot of effort into PowerPoint presentations. I just don't know which way is up, and therefore I just haven't had time to put anything together. So I'm going to basically stand here and wave my arms around a bit and waffle at you. And I have to say, to be here in the presence of a great many names in Jewish genealogy who have been leading lights in our field for so long makes me rather humble. And here am I, little me, standing on a stage addressing conference, and there are people who have been 40, 50 years who are more experienced, more skillful, more well-known than me. So I feel very humbled to be asked to address you. Right, so I think that's covered all the apologies and stuff at the beginning. So a bit about me. My parents were from London, but I'm not. My mum was from Chiswick. My dad was from Brondesbury and Kilburn area. My parents got married at Brook Green Shul, the old Brook Green Shul, which no longer exists, in 1967. And I'm very, very excited to say I have my dad here with me today. Put your hand up, Vati. And it's his birthday tomorrow. So I'm not sure whether nachas works both ways, but I take a great deal of nachas, and this is the first time I have ever done a speech, or a lecture, or whatever you want to call this, a chat to anybody, and I've had a family member with me, so I'm very excited to have Vati and my stepmom Susan with me in the front row today. So yes. So my parents married in 1967 and moved immediately to Peterborough, where they were for a few years. And then Vati, I call my dad Vati, you're just going to have to deal with that, I'm afraid. Vati got a job in Liverpool for a large employer called Plessy. And so they moved up to the Wirral. So I was born in Chester, brought up in the Chester Jewish community, and to a certain extent in Liverpool at Prince's Road Shul. Some of you probably know Prince's Road Shul for various things like being beautiful and old and things like that. So yes, so I was really, I suppose every child sooner or later says, Mummy, Daddy, what's my family tree? Well, every Jewish child does, don't they? So yes, so I asked that question, and I remember we had this sort of chart which starts off in my handwriting with my first cousins and me and my grandparents, and then Vati said, right, let me do my family, and he sort of went off the page like this, and my mum said, right, let me do my family, and hers went off the page like that. So yes, so that was the first family tree that we had, and I then sort of did it up for a school project a few years later, but yes, I just got hooked like we all have been by genealogy. The problem was there was one big mystery, which was Vati's father's side, which was the Mark surname. And the big mystery there was they wouldn't say where they came from or what their real name was or anything. It's one of those complete brick walls that you meet straight away. So I sort of said, oh, well, you know, I will solve this brick wall, and promptly had no idea how to do it. So I got on with my life. So I went to school, and then I went to university. I did applied psychology even. As an undergrad, I was at Stockton-on-Tees. I then started a PGCE to become a teacher, and when you find yourself at 4 in the morning in a fetal position crying on the floor, you know it's the wrong career choice. So yes, and by that point I had done quite a bit of genealogy for my own family, and people kept saying, we should do it as a career, and everybody else said, you can't make a career out of genealogy, you can't charge enough, there's not enough clients, don't be ridiculous. So I looked at it and decided I was ridiculous. But I thought, fine, well, I'll do some more stuff. I'll do private client work, start some private client work in the background while I find a real job. So then I thought, well, if I'm going to do private client work, I should probably have a qualification. So I decided I was the department of Newcastle University, where I'd done my PGCE, actually hosted some night school stuff. So I did beginners, intermediate, and advanced genealogy, but already being a professional and having quite a few years experience, and the advanced one was on first. So I became an advanced genealogist before I became an intermediate genealogist, but there we are. So then I decided I was going to be an archivist. And archivists are wonderful people. So I moved back from the northeast, and I relocated to Liverpool and did a master's in archives and records management from Liverpool. Promptly failed to get a job in the archive sector. It's incredibly competitive, and I was rubbish. So I thought, well, I'll just do some more private client genealogy and it'll all be fine. And went to America for a month on holiday and that kind of thing. Anyway, so then I saw this program called Heir Hunters. Someone said, there's this program and it's about genealogy. It's just started this week on BBC One. This was series 1, which was 2007. And I watched one of the first episodes of the first week and thought, I can do that. That's part of my field. It's something that I can do. And that's quite looks more lucrative than doing private clients. So then I went to a party a couple of weeks later, and chap at the party, who I've never seen before or since, who was only a vague acquaintance of the person who had the party, said, oh, my mum was an heir, and she was contacted by one of those companies. Here's the chap's number. Great, I thought, and then didn't do anything for a year. And my girlfriend at the time, now my beloved wife and mother of my children, said to me, stop whinging you haven't got any money. You've got that number sitting on there. Bloody ring it. So I took the number off the Post-it note that I put on the shelf, and I rang it, and I got myself a job with Celtic Research, and I was with them for 9.5 years. And I'll talk in more depth about the actual job itself in a second. But with Celtic, I was on Heir Hunters. I've been on 30-odd episodes of Heir Hunters over 9 years. I was then in a program called The House Through Time, which some of you have probably seen, which was it was January this year, about the history of a house in Liverpool. I'll tell you a bit about that afterwards, because it's quite funny, because we filmed loads of cool stuff for that, and they used all the boring bits, and the bits that were less relevant they wanted to film, and the bits that were more relevant they didn't want to film, but there we are. My relationship with Celtic Research came to an end in March this year, and I pitched myself to another company called Harrison's Research, who are based in Watford, who were delighted to have myself and my colleagues in my office. And we've carried on where we left off with Celtic, really. We've just been filming for a new series. The working title is something like Find Me a Home, but it's about empty homes. It's going to be coming out, I'm not sure when, but soonish. And we've been filming for that, about how homes in this country become empty and what can be done to bring them back into ownership. So in the midst of all that, I got very involved with Princes Road Shul. I was in the choir. I was bar mitzvah there. I've been in the choir there for years. In 1872. Well, I was. They do tell me I was born in the wrong century. I'm going to try and make this work now. In 1872, it was the chap who was the chap elected as junior treasurer in that year was the youngest warden ever elected at Princes Road. I was the next youngest in 2006. And I'm very passionate about Princes Road, and people say, oh, Liverpool, it's a provincial community, it's dying, what's the point of carrying on? It's a load of rubbish, it's a fantastic community, there's loads going on. People say, oh, don't do too many events because they'll be on top of each other and they'll take people away from each other, and rubbish. Loads of events, loads of stuff going on. And in the midst of all that, I've managed to digitise all our marriage records, and I'm helping to digitise all our burial records for Liverpool. If you've got any ancestors buried in Liverpool, speak to me, speak to Phil Sapiro, great chap, you'll be hearing more about him in the next few years. And after all that, in the midst of meeting my wife, I also found the breakthrough for the Tarachowski side of our family, the Ukrainian side of the family. We found a very elusive, close but very elusive cousin in Canada who gave us 3 vital clues about how to solve this brick wall of Varty's paternal ancestry. And we ended up speaking to people in Liverpool who we'd even met and bumped into and had no idea we were relations, and had a fantastic reunion, and it was wonderful, and we've now got the family back to the 1770s. So yes, so that was meant to take 5 minutes. It's now taken about 13. So yes. Right, probate genealogy. Well, Martin asked me to do a sort of bio for this, sort of what it is. And I wrote, it is blending traditional genealogy with aspects of sales and law. So to give you an idea of the probate genealogy process, how many of you have seen Air Hunters? Hands up. Oh, loads of you. So there we are. So I can run through this fairly quickly. So somebody dies without leaving a will or without leaving a known will, and their relatives are not immediately known to the people who are surrounding them. So whoever is dealing with that, the local council or the care home or the hospital or whoever, will refer that case to the Treasury Solicitor's Office, which is now called the Government Legal Department. They cannot claim it on behalf of the Crown for 30 years, and they are obliged to advertise it. So they advertise it on the Bonaventia list, which you've heard about. We work cases off the list from scratch with basic information such as name, date and place of birth, date and place of death, and that's pretty much it. And we research it, find the families, and then we contact them, and that's where the sales part comes in, because we invite them to sign a contract, but you don't ever call it a contract. Sign a form with us to allow us to put your claim through to the estate. So typically we say don't sign for anything less than 10%, don't sign for anything above 25%. Different cases attract different percentages. If it's a lot of hard work and they're Smiths and Joneses, you can charge 20 and get away with it. If it's somebody's father who they happen to have lost touch with for a few years and they didn't know he died, then you probably charge 10. But that is the sales part, because you sort of have to ring up and sell them the contract, if you like. They then, all being well, hopefully sign the contract with you. You then get all the certificates to prove that they are correctly related to the deceased. You then put that claim into the Treasury. What you actually do these days is, as well as submitting the claim to the Treasury, you submit the claim to the referring party who referred it to the Treasury, but that gets overcomplicated. It used to be much more simple. It's much more complicated and fragmented these days. But yeah, that's the legal part of it, in that we have to prove the relationship, and sometimes, if it's not a nice English family where you can just go up the generations and down again with a set of certificates, sometimes you're involved with censuses and Hamish records and sort of all kinds of other bits and pieces to prove the case. Then the Treasury and the referring party say, yes, this is the right family, we admit the claim, and they will then give it back to us. We then hand it over to our solicitor, who deals with all the administration side. So that's things like getting a grant of letters of administration for the estate and bringing in all the assets, dealing with all the liabilities, and then ultimately distributing. And that whole thing normally takes sort of anywhere between 6 and 18 months usually. So you can work a case today and you won't actually get paid for it for about a year's time. And you have to sort of survive in the meantime by doing more cases which you're not going to get paid for another year's time, and you end up bankrupt? No, you survive. So yes, so one of the legal aspects of this is the importance of making a will. How many people know people who say, oh, well, they're my common law spouse, or they were so-and-so's common law spouse, so that's okay? It's not. Common law spouses don't exist in English law. They exist in some states in America, but not others. So you get people, I've worked cases where there was a chap who lived with a woman for 50-something years, never married her. She'd had 9 children by her first husband, got divorced, got with this chap, and they'd lived together since about 1966. And I think she had died, and then he had died, and her estate gets nothing because common law spouses don't exist. And that I see a lot of people in the Jewish community who, a widow and a widower get together, and they're together for a number of years, but they don't get married, well, there's nothing in law to say that they're going to inherit from each other, so always be careful with that. Some people say to me, especially within the Jewish community, they say, well, you can't get that many Jewish cases because everybody knows everybody and everybody knows each other's family. But hands up, how many people know people in your shul or your community center who are right on the fringes and you don't know anything about them? Hands up. People who you think, I don't think they have any family at all. The people who remind you of Reb Nachum the beggar in Fiddler on the Roof. We've got one at Prince's Road, and you just think, gosh, when the time comes, who's going to inherit? Where are your family? And you start thinking, well, how can we help these people? What can we do? And you start thinking about what can people like Jewish Care do and other provincial versions of Jewish Care. How can we make sure that these people have something and that their wishes are looked after? People who have no family or estranged from their family, have distant cousins. So there are Jewish cases, and I'll come on to talk about them shortly. The job itself of being an heir hunter, a probate genealogist, is very competitive. You've seen the program, so it's often a sort of race against the other companies. Who can get somebody on the door first. I've been in a situation where I worked a case. Most of my cases are non-Jewish, obviously. Case of a chap called Smith, and you think, oh, Smith, right? So this guy had died, and we were fairly certain, somehow we concluded that there were two brothers. And this was when the cases used to come out at midnight, and you'd work it sort of, you'd start your working week at midnight on a Wednesday night, Thursday, and you'd sort of do 3 or 4 hours work and go to bed and get up and have sort of 2 hours sleep and get up and drive across the country to go and see somebody and try not to crash on the way. So we found these two brothers who were living on the same street in Liverpool, a few doors away from each other. And I rang the elder one up and said, I'd like to come and see you, regarding the estate of your brother. And he said, yeah, fine, I'm walking the dogs this morning. He said, I rang him about 8 in the morning. I'm just about to go out to walk the dogs. He must have been about 75. And he said, yeah, I'll be back by 9 o'clock. Come and see me at 9 o'clock. So I went there at 9 o'clock. And I was sitting chatting to him and his wife and explaining the processes and stuff. Anyway, so about 9:20, knock at the door. Other company comes along. Oh, yes, come in, he says. I'm like, hang on a minute. How do you even know who he is? And you rang. No, you rang. No, you rang. No, wait a minute. And this gentleman had been contacted by ourselves and by a rival company, and he thought we were both the same company and had invited us both for 9 o'clock. And my rival had been caught in the traffic between Preston and Liverpool, hadn't got there on time. So here we are with myself here and Keith Jolly of Hoopers over here. And we're sort of going, what do we do now? So he rang his boss and I rang my boss, and the two bosses had a chat with each other, and they came to the conclusion that Keith was going to sidle out the door and I was going to sign the chat for 10% and we'd split it with Hoopers, and that's what happened. Not very many weeks later was a very interesting case of a chap who died in North Wales. He had family from all over everywhere. And it was a big race. There were 3 companies involved in this, and I got to this woman's house. Gosh, it was late afternoon, and she just got home from work. And I think I was the second person. There was somebody who had just turned up from another company. Then there was me, and while I was there, a third person turned up. I think maybe I was third. Either way. This woman, bless her, she just got in from work and she was exhausted, and she had all these people. So she put 2 of us in the kitchen, and she took the first one in, and she dealt with him in the lounge, and sort of he made his pitch to her and left his paperwork with her, and then he left. And then the horrible woman from the other company who, yes, I've only met her the once, and she very unethical company, unethical woman. Anyway, so she went in next and made her pitch and left. By the time I went in, she had a large glass of wine in her hand, so I made my pitch and left my stuff, and I can't remember who she signed with in the end, but you get the idea that it's very competitive, and there can be skullduggery that goes on, but if you ever get approached, well, firstly, you probably know the family and can do it all yourselves, unless it's me, in which case you want to sign with me, don't you? So don't get drawn into different percentages. Have a look at the percentages. What we'll say is have a look at the customer service that you get. You know, what are you going to get for your 10% or 15% that you're going to give the company? You know, do you get a free family tree with it? That sort of stuff. And who other people like to work with? I find Yidden like signing with Yidden, which always helps. And you can ring somebody up, and it's a Friday, and you ring them up, and you say good Shabbos to them, and then they're going to sign with you because nobody else is going to say good Shabbos to them. So yes, I mean, but the local advantage works as well. You know, we do cases from all over the Northwest, and the Wirral is a very sort of niche place to live, and you know, you find somebody from the Wirral who gets contacted by somebody else from the Wirral versus a random person from a random London company, and they're always going to sign with the local person. So yeah. In terms of Air Hunters, people go, oh, you know, do you get paid decently for it? You don't get paid a penny for being on Air Hunters. What you get is the free publicity of being on it, which is all very well, but it's just been cancelled. They're not, well, the BBC have chosen not to take a 13th season, 13th series. There have been 12 series. The BBC have chosen not to take it. But the people who make the programme, bear in mind, most programmes are not made by broadcasters. They're made by companies and sold to the broadcasters. The company, Flame TV, who make Air Hunters, they have said, we keep being tapped up by all sorts of people over the last 12 years, 11, 12 years of the programme. Do we want to move it here and move it there? Now it's time to go out to them and say, right, it's now open. So you might find it turns up on Channel 4 or Channel 5 or another channel, one of the cable channels or something. So yes, I don't think you'll be seeing Air Hunters on BBC One again. But it should be back. They came to me the other week and said, are you happy to still be on it? And I said yes. And when I moved from Celtic to Harrison's, they said, I said, look, if I move companies, will you still follow my work? And they said, yes, absolutely. So hopefully it will continue. It can be difficult trying to get them to film cases, though. Sometimes you throw a batch of cases at them, they sort of email you in the middle of the year going, right, you know, we're now accepting cases for the new series. And you have to sort of jump in there with loads of stuff, sort of, here's an outline of some cases which I've got, and I write them a big waffle saying, you know, about each case, going, you know, these are the good things, these are the bad things, this is the interesting stuff, these are people you want to film with. And then they come back and say, oh, well, we've got a World War I story already, and we've got a D-Day landing story already. I'm like, no, you haven't, because you only asked for them yesterday, and I've given you like 3. So yes, it can be hard politically to try and get the stories you want on TV on TV. Filming companies often have their own agenda for what they want to put on. So there was a case that we did, a fascinating case, lots of interesting things, including a tragic Victorian girl who all these Victorian children were running rings around a fire, and this girl's dress caught alight and she died, and she was about 6, and it was awful. But I had the newspaper cutting from the BNA, and there were family photos and all sorts, and it would have been brilliant on TV. It turned out that another branch of the family had worked at the Cholmondeley estate, which was it's a big Cheshire estate. And because Cholmondeley wouldn't film, they said, right, Cholmondeley don't want to film, so therefore we're not going to do the case overall. And I said, you've got, this was a D-Day landing story. It was a diabetes story. The deceased mother had died from complications of gestational diabetes, and there were lots of really unusual things about this case that made it eminently filmable. But because they didn't, the angle they wanted wasn't going to work, they wouldn't film. It was very frustrating. So how are we doing for time? We're doing all right. Okay, so Casebook of Jewish Cases. I've got 5 cases to waffle to you about. The first one I ever did on TV was Sylvia Casson. It is on YouTube. If you go on YouTube and type Saul Marks Casson, C-A-S-S-O-N, I think, then you'll find it on there. Yeah, we filmed that in 2009. She was a lady from the East End. She'd been married, happily married. She lived well into her 90s. Her son had passed away in about his 30s or 40s. Her husband had also predeceased her, and she was the last one left of her family. And we found all her cousins. And then during the course of the administration of the estate, turns out she had a will, and all our work was for nothing. But it happens. It happens. You know, you find that, you know, the house or the flat gets searched, or a solicitor comes along going, yes, I've got that will here. And you think, oh, well, that's however many weeks work down the drain. So you can see that It turns out that the executor of the will was actually one of the heirs who we'd found, and she didn't even know she was executor, I don't think. So that was the Casson case. The Selman case was also one which we filmed. It was frustrating because I couldn't get Selman started at all. Total brick wall from the beginning, and it turned out through the wonders of London electoral rolls being on Ancestry that I knew where the deceased and his sisters had lived, and it turned out that there were people there originally called Solomons, and Selman was an anglicisation of Solomons, and there were other cousins called Salter, and we solved it and proved it, and there was one lady from Hull, I think, or somewhere in East Yorkshire, who had long since married out, who got the whole lot in the end. I can't remember quite how. I think there was another one where a will turned up, but we'd signed the heir, so it was okay. So we got some commission from that one. But yes, the amazing thing about that one was it wasn't just that the surnames changed, but the actual name of the street changed. In the First World War, obviously there was a lot of de-Germanization of things, and this family lived on Wiesbaden Street, and they didn't like that, so they changed it to Belgrade Street. So they were, I think it was number 17 or 11 or something. So you've got them there in the electorals or something. They were in one record as 11 Wiesbaden Street, and then later on 11 Belgrade. Oh, they've moved. Wait a minute. And then you discovered through the electorals actually this street was the same street, and this was a big thing. It's like, wait a minute. Now let's go back and do all the research again, looking at the other street and see where we get to. And there were all the Solomons. It's like, okay, fine. So that was hard work. That was filmed. You'll have seen that one. There's one which was filmed, which is still ongoing, hasn't distributed yet, but it has been filmed, so I can chat about it using names. That's the Rubin case. This lady, I've forgotten her first name actually now. It was only on last week. No, last year. It was last year's series 11. She was from a Jacoba de Good she was, and she became Jeanette Rubin or something. She was born in Holland, but from a family who was backwards and forwards from Holland to London. I think her mother was English, her parents had married here, her father was Dutch, or both her parents were Dutch, but they'd married here, and then they moved back to Holland, had some children, and then they moved back here again. And then I think one of them ended up moving back to Holland, one of her brothers moved back to Holland again, and they were crissing and crossing the bottom of the North Sea. We have connections all over the world, and particularly in Europe, and we have a very good Dutch agent who we worked with at Celtic and who I still have connections with. And we said to her, right, look here, you take the Dutch lot, we'll take the English lot, and we'll meet you in the middle. And we did. She did a lot of work and found, tragically, there were something like over 30 Holocaust victims from the Nazi occupation of Holland. And that was, when we came to film that, they said, look, we'd like to do something about this. How do you feel about sort of talking about the Holocaust? And I was like, well, okay. And we talked about how we were going to do it, how we were going to pitch it, and you have to think about your audience. You know, this is daytime TV, and you've got to think about how much do we want to go into, and what angle do we want to come at this from. So we had to work it out carefully, and we came up with some sensitive words to explain what this was about and get across the poignancy of it. That case still hasn't distributed, and it's not our fault because there's another company who's also involved, and we tried to prove our claim, and the Treasury rejected it on a technicality. So we said to the other company, right, you try and see how you get on, and we're still waiting. But yes, so that was the Rubin case. There are two other cases which were very interesting. There was a chap whose name I probably shouldn't give out who lived in Edgware in a flat, and he was very much a loner, like all these people are, and he had cousins, and his cousins knew him, and he was really quite an oddball character, and you know, nobody had ever seen him with anybody. He had no children, had no wife, never had a girlfriend, that kind of thing, and he died, and it was a sort of sad existence, and all the cousins, even the ones who had done the family tree, were like, yes, fine, we'll sign up. Then the estate gets a claim in from a Filipino woman who says, I was married to the deceased and my son is his son, and he's actually the sole heir entitled. And we said, really? And she said, really? And we said, prove it. And she came up with a Catholic parish marriage register in Latin for a marriage between her and the deceased in the 1980s, when the deceased was in his 50s, and the baptism of the child, who was by this point about 28 or something. And they proved it, and they proved it with DNA. And we had to give the whole thing up, and all our work, we had to go back to all the cousins and say, sorry. And they said, really? He had a child? And yeah, so people will always surprise you. You know, if you think about it, genealogy is names and dates and stuff on pieces of paper, but these are real people and real lives, and that's the sort of thing that makes you go, wow, this is real. These are real relationships here, and the realities. You know, we'd love it if people fit nicely into boxes, and they were born here, and they're married here, and they died here. And it's easy to do, but genealogy is tracing what happens to humans, and humans do strange things and unusual things, and that's what makes us so wonderful. So yes, and then there was another case for which I am indebted to JGSGB and a certain Charles Tucker. There was a lady whose her cousin died in Eastbourne. And she was a cousin on the maternal side. And she said she knew who the maternal cousins were. And she was trying to go about proving, you know, her and her sister and her cousin's entitlement to this gentleman's estate. And she came here, I think, or she came to the society not really knowing what to do about the paternal side. And she said, well, they didn't know him. They were never in touch with him. They shouldn't be allowed to be entitled. And they said, it doesn't work like that. You know, the law doesn't say, well, you've seen him more often than you have, so you can have the money. Especially as this estate was it was a very high value estate. He owned at least one property and a whole load of other savings and things. So she ended up getting involved with Charles Tucker, and Charles Tucker said, you want to speak to Saul Marks, he'll sort you out, because he works for one of the probate companies. So I'm exceedingly indebted to Charles, because this lady came to me and said, right, look, I've got to find this other family on the paternal side of my cousin's family, because I'm told that they've got to inherit this money as well as us. So it was our job to then find the paternal side, which we did, and it was a big family, and they'd all lost touch, and this lady was really annoyed that all these cousins who had lost touch for decades were going to inherit some of the money, quite a lot of the money, in fact, because there were more paternal branches than maternal. And she said, you know, she was saying it's really not fair. And I found out why they weren't in contact, and that was simply that the deceased parents had divorced, and he'd been brought up by his mother, and he'd had sporadic contact with his father throughout his life. And all the paternal cousins were like, it's such a shame we lost touch with him. We all knew he existed, but nobody was in touch with him, and it's such a shame, and we wish we had been in touch with him. And they did the stone setting, and some of the paternal cousins came to the stone setting, and the woman from the maternal side fell out with them, because you've got to have a bride at the stone setting, haven't you? So it all got sorted, and yeah, so that brings me nicely to the last section, which is basically that we always want new cases. So Harrison's is based in Watford, reasonably big Jewish community around there, especially serving all of North London. I'm obviously in the Northwest office, which is up near Liverpool, but that's okay. I'm on the WhatsApp and phone to head office all the time and stuff. So there's got to be, amongst you all know Jewish solicitors and Jewish solicitors firms and things like that. Send all your business this way. Never mind about title research and all the others who people use and finders and stuff. We're better. We're Jewish. I can't say that, can I? Awful. But Jewish people like signing with Jewish people. So if you're a Jewish solicitor trying to find a Jewish family, then the Jewish genealogist is going to get the signature, and the other people are going to be hang about. So yeah. So yes, there's four of us who work in my office. I'm very excited to have my wife back in the office with me, having been on maternity for 6.5 years. But I have two other assistants, so there's four of us who work in my office just outside Liverpool. So yes, so any referrals you want to send our way, send our way. The only prop I have is a stack of business cards. I don't know whether I should leave them here or leave them on Jeanette's table or something, but have them, take them. I don't want them. So yes, people say, do you do private client work? I do still do private client work. You know, who's done maths here? Who's a mathematician? Hands up. Okay, you've got pure maths and applied maths. So pure maths is solving quadratic equations because they're fun, right? Applied maths is solving a complicated thing about how many forces are acting in which direction on this, because if it doesn't, then the crane's going to fall over and the workmen are going to die. So I did A-level maths and loved it and hated it at the same time. I loved the pure maths. Maths just because it's fun and I love algebra. And I hated the applied maths. Genealogy, I'm not quite so polarized, but probate genealogy is applied maths. It's genealogy for a purpose in order to get to the people before the other companies do and sign them up. Private client work is the pure stuff. That's the stuff where you can take your time, you're not in a rush, and you've got a specific, hopefully specific brief from a client, we wish, and you know, you can work through it and you can put together a thing. I've got a chap who's an American diplomat at the moment who wants a big commission for his wife for her 60th birthday next year, and we've got her family, non-Jewish family, back to a separate thing that's gone into the 1570s. So yeah, you want nice cases like that. The problem is they take time, and I just don't have time. So if you're going to give me private client work, there is at least a 6 to 12 month wait before I can even get to you at the moment. Or I can refer you to Lawrence, who's a fantastic private client genealogist as well. So what I've said here is Q&A left over. I don't know how long we've got left. As I say, because this hasn't been an instructional 3-minute warning. Because this hasn't been an instructional thing, I don't know if it's provoked any questions, but I'm all yours. Yes?
Peter Harwood, do you have a cold case division? You said 30 years was the time that the government legal kept the case before they grabbed the money.
Yes.
Is there a section that goes back maybe 20 years and the rest of stuff that can't be solved?
We look at all sorts of stuff from anything within 30 years. So I've got cases where the deceased died in 1991, and you've got things where you think, oh, not long now before that reaches statute. Yes, there's most of the cases we do are recent deaths, but there are plenty which you get involved with them and then they get stuck. We're all dying to get our hands on the 1921 census in a few years' time, aren't we? Well, that's going to solve a whole load of cases for us. I've got a little. I think it's a mental rather than a physical list of ones which, as soon as the 21 census comes out, the first day I'm going to be on there looking those ones up. So yes, we do old cases. If you've got old cases, throw them our way, definitely.
I've got a friend who has ancestors who were fur traders and things. And about a year ago, she received a letter from a solicitor in Spain telling her that she was probably the heir of a family of a millionaire. I persuaded her it was a scam. Did I do her a disservice?
Well, there are different ways you can tell if something is a scam or if it isn't. Anything that asks you to pay money up front is going to be a scam. The interesting thing is emails. If you look at the email address, if you get an email, you get the person's name and you get their email address. If you look at the email address, if it doesn't match the person's name or doesn't obviously look like it's something normal, or instead of a P it's got a rho, a Greek rho, or instead of an L it's got a 1, you know that's bot generated spam. And it's a scam. So yes, if in doubt, ask questions. I had great fun with the chap who I knew from the beginning he was a scam, and I dragged him along for ages and just had a laugh with him backwards and forwards with the emails until he realised that after about 3 weeks, that I rumbled him from the beginning. And but yes, no, never pay anything up front. Always ask questions. Yeah.
So you solved a case using DNA, how do you do that if a person's dead?
Because in that particular case, that was all done through legal DNA collection. So they had a member of the court staff go to the deceased's flat with witnesses and take DNA from the deceased's toothbrush or hairbrush or something and collect DNA from the son, and they did a match. But that was, we think of DNA as, we dribble in a tube for Ancestry or Family Tree DNA or whoever, and you can't do it if the person's dead. In this case, it was court collection. This was all solicitor backed, and it wasn't one of the genealogy genetic companies that did it. It was a different company that does paternity tests for things for legal stuff. So it was done by using things that had his DNA on it, but it had to be. I think at one point it had to be redone because it couldn't be. It was collected. And the court person wasn't watching when it was collected, and it wasn't admissible to the court, so they had to redo it, and that kind of stuff.
Henry Roach, I wonder how old your profession is. The reason I'm asking, it sounds a strange question, is that when I was young, one of my great uncles, we were approached by some solicitor. I was in my teens, so I don't know much about it. Joseph Hiller, my great uncle, died in Canada or America. And someone had found our family, because my mother's mother was a Hiller, and eventually the money was spread around, and my parents inherited something. And then when I became a genealogist, I looked into this, and I found to my horror that the whole thing was a complete fake. And this is maybe a very well-known story, and one of my mother's cousins said, yes, we all knew that at the time, but we didn't say anything. So I must apologize on behalf of my Gentile ancestors. So is this a common story, and how old is your profession?
Well, I suspect the profession is older than the oldest existing company. Fraser and Fraser and Hoopers share a joint ancestry, if you like. I'm not quite sure how it works because I'm a little bit too far down the line in terms of generations. My ex-boss at Celtic actually worked with the people who basically founded Frasers or almost founded Frasers years ago, so he knew more about it than I did. But the oldest companies in this country date from about the 1920s. But I think that the actual concept of finding who owns or who is entitled to the dead person's stuff is probably centuries old. But as a paid profession with companies and staff in a structured manner in this country, it's the late 1910s, early 1920s. And is it common to have fakes? Well, these days, yes. But again, you've just got to be discerning. You get something like that, and you've got to say, well, does it feel right? I mean, I've had people slam the phone down on me because they think I'm selling them something or I'm fake or whatever. It's about authentication. If you get a cold caller, how many people hang the phone up within the first 5 seconds? Hands up. Right, don't. Give them 15 seconds. If they are genuinely selling them something, then you can politely say, thank you very much, I'm not interested, and put the phone down. But you have to give them 10 seconds, 15 seconds to actually explain who they are and why they're ringing. Interestingly, if they give you a surname, I say to my staff, give your surname. If I ring up and say, my name's Saul Marks, my name's not Jim or Bob or whoever, I've given you something to Google there. And you can go away and Google it, and you can Google and you say at the end of the conversation, here's my name again, here's my company name, here's our website, go and Google stuff, here's my phone number. You don't have to sign anything on the spot, go away and find out who they are. So always be discerning, but don't put the phone down on cold callers, because there's a chance that someone's going to be someone like me when they have to cold call you as part of their job. I have to cold doorstep people. I have to go to people's houses and ring the doorbell. I went to a place in Stourbridge once, and this woman we knocked on her door, and she saw who I had a trainee with me at the time, and she thought we were Jehovah's Witnesses or something. And she opened the inner door and saw who we were and slammed the door, and I sort of opened the letterbox and said, about Auntie so-and-so, and then she opened the door. how do you know my auntie so-and-so? It's like, well, if you let me finish. So, yes, just give your cold callers another few seconds just to explain who they are, and then you can decide whether they're worth your time or whether they're not.
Just to sort of answer Henry's question about the processes before air hunters came along, and it is something that still goes on. The London Gazette used to publish lists of estates. Which,
Section 27s.
Yeah. And also there would be notices in newspapers and things like that saying, if anybody has any connection with this family, with this individual, please contact the solicitors and things like that, or the people handling the case. So there was a process, but it was a self-selecting rather than somebody going out and looking.
Yeah. The legal profession assumes that we all read the London Gazette from cover to cover. So yes, as part of the administration process, the solicitor will place, if the estate is above a certain value, the solicitor will place a Section 27 notice in the London Gazette plus one local newspaper, and that's been going on since the dawn of time, as Mark says.
Saul, I don't want to put a jarring note into your mind, but check about the 2021 release of the 1921 census. Each census has to be voted for by an Act of Parliament. In 1921, I am told a glitch occurred, so that the possibility of it being released 100 years later is not yet resolved. Now, if it's been resolved, fair enough, but I'm sure I read somewhere that because of a legal quirk at the drawing up of this individual census, it's under suspicion it may not be releasable. Just check. That's all.
Not be releasable?
That was the information that I read. If I'm wrong...
Is this a moment for sackcloth and ashes and stuff? No, that's a bit worrying. Okay, thank you very much. As I say, somebody who is far more learned than me.